Probably a Awarded for Kit Guru. Today's review is this case from Cooler Master called the MasterCase H500M. The M apparently stands for maker, but it is not called the H500 maker. It kind of alludes to it, which is a little confusing. We originally had the H500P that did not do well. It couldn't breathe through the front panel and various bits fell off. We're going to regard the H500P as a sort of a beta version. Then we had the H500 Mesh, which could breathe and bits did not fall off it. And we like that case. That's a good case. And now we have essentially the RGB version of that case. So it's got two 200mm fans at the front, but instead of regular common or garden RGB lighting, they've got addressable RGB, ARGB, and you've got a whole bunch of glass. I'm going to take off that panel over there so you can see more closely inside before I turn the case around. And I require this screwdriver because Cooler Master has stuck to its belief that you should have a special tool to open the side panel of your case. Solid glass panel, obviously no noise deadening material, metal frame. It does actually hang in place quite well when you undo the screw. Put that there. When you undo the screw, it doesn't immediately drop in your lap, but nonetheless, I've previously complained when Cooler Master insisted you had a key to unlock the side panels of your case. I think the idea you have to have a plain screwdriver, not the greatest idea. I've been told that apparently a coin will do the job. I'm going to use this Phillips screwdriver inside the case to remove various panels and such like, but that fastener, it just annoys me. It's not a big deal, but it's something I've mentioned on previous Cooler Masters, and I'm sticking to my guns on this one. Having to use a different tool for two fasteners, because there's also a panel on the back, annoying. Now then, we've got glass on the front, on the top and the two sides. If I remove the top panel, so thumb screw at the rear as with the H500 Mesh, lift up the panel and away it comes, and it looks pretty much like the previous, except it's now got a solid panel. And that reveals the top of the chassis. Swing the case around, just like so, and you can see a heck of a lot of RGB going on. That's quite deliberate. What we have is an Asus Crosshair 7 Hero Wi-Fi motherboard. It's got a Ryzen 7 2700X processor installed. This is the same motherboard I reviewed a few weeks ago as a standalone review. Very good motherboard, and significantly it has Aura lighting, and it also has both RGB and ARGB headers. It's actually got two of each, two up the top and two down the bottom. Amazingly well appointed as motherboards go. Although, funnily enough, it doesn't quite live up to the demands of this chassis. Surprising but true. What else have we got? So, hysterically, I've got a GTX 980 graphics card because at the moment all my various 1080s and 1080 Ti's are in use in another project. So I've had to stick a graphics card in. And the cooler, which might look, I mean, it looks obviously quite appealing, might look a little bit oldie-worldy being an air cooler, is the AMD Wraith Prism. And that's significant because it's actually manufactured by Cooler Master, and it has RGB lighting, and it is currently connected to an RGB header. And if you note, the lighting on the Wraith Prism is in sync with the motherboard, which is all lovely. We've also got some Patriot Viper RGB memory, which is obviously RGB as the name suggests. I haven't yet got around to doing a review of the memory. That is going to come after Computex. I'll just run out of time. It is supposed to sync up with Aura, but you also get a Patriot control utility. I'm using the Patriot utility just in a rainbow marquee at the moment, but more details when I get to do the actual review. So we've got motherboard and cooler working together. We've got memory doing something separate, and then we have the two 200mm fans at the front with all the RGB goodness. And whilst they look lovely, they are not connected to an RGB header on the motherboard. Let me just turn the case around so you can see the front, and then I'm going to show you what I can do with this button here, which essentially is stepping through a bunch of presets that look very nice. No two ways about it, looks good. That button on the I/O panel is the reset button, because the reset button has been repurposed. So you've got a power button and you've got what should be a reset button but is actually an RGB control button. That's off for, you know, RGB haters. And then we go back to a marquee, which is a delight. Why, you may wonder, are these fans not connected to the RGB header? Why are they not doing the whole Aura thing? Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to show you inside. Before I do that, I'm just going to turn off the power. Press and hold the power button, shut it down. I'm going to spin it round. Here we have the backside panel, which is, as far as I can work out, exactly the same as the main panel. So again, you have a screw to release, which in this case you have to turn clockwise. Counterintuitive to my mind, but there we have it. And there we have the simple little tag thing. Let's move this out of the way. And behind that glass, you can see basically nothing. You can see a bunch of steel panels. They're all kind of covering things up. So if we take off this panel here, 2 screws, does require a screwdriver. Panel drops down. Let's just pull off that reset button to reveal the RGB controller. This is actually the source of this slightly delayed review, because our first RGB controller, the chip burned out. Not quite sure what happened there, but I'll come to that in slightly more detail in a moment. Up here we've got a plastic cover that goes on the back of the motherboard socket, and here we've got another cover. 2 screws, 1. Pull that out, and all the cabling that you might expect ordinarily to see, that's sort of, well, hidden away really. All that cabling there goes to the front panel. That is a lighting connector. This is from the power supply. Hidden in there is Panasonic 600 watt fanless prime titanium, completely shrouded. So this business about the RGB controller, we've got 2 connectors, one of which is currently in use for the 2 front fans. That is the connector that leads off to the motherboard, to the ARGB. That is the toggle button, which currently goes to the reset, and it's even labelled reset for the front panel. That is a USB, micro USB there. And I'm wondering if that was my problem with the first of the controllers, because I did connect that when I first saw it, as you do with a Corsair or any such system, before I realised there wasn't actually any software with this case. This is actually labelled as for firmware update, but I've heard that there is software in the works, and then we have a SATA power connector to power the whole thing. When I got the replacement board through, I left the USB unattached. I have tried using the ARGB connector to no effect. But I can toggle through, as you saw, successfully with the button. As and when Cooler Master supplies some software, well, that'll be a thing. Now, the thing about this panel, apart from the fact the panel is obviously a lot larger than the controller board, is look at that. I mean, the cabling has to come out of the power supply, around the side there, and then you put the cover back in place if you can get it all lined up correctly, because as we know, SATA plugs don't like being squished, being as how they are, you know, right angles and solid. Put that okay. This is going well. Okay, that is in the correct place. This sort of top edge goes just below these little sort of stamp bumps, and then these cables have to feed under there, and then they can come, make sure I'm not squishing it. Yeah, they do just come out, and then you can put the main cover, bomph, to cover it all up. Returning to the main compartment, we have a new pump bracket there. It's nothing special, but it does a certain job. The idea obviously is if you're going to liquid cool your system with a custom loop, you put your pump reservoir there, job done. Support for radiators is exactly the same as before, so up to a 360 or 280 in the front, up to a 360 or a 280 in the roof. I would have said with the two 200 fans in the front, there's not a chance you're going to change those clearly. If you want to put a radiator on the front which doesn't match the fans, okie dokie. Common sense, I think, says that people are going to be looking to the top. I've previously used an all-in-one in one of the previous versions of this chassis. It was the mesh I reviewed. Dominic did the H500P. So in the mesh I used an all-in-one, so it seemed sensible to me to do something slightly different in this review. And as Cooler Master makes the prism cooler, and we're doing RGB in this one, that was why I opted for the cooler that I've gone for rather than using the liquid cooling feature. Putting a pump on there, yeah, you can put a pump on there. I mean, what more can I say? Now, what else? Oh yes, so when we went from the beta H500P to the H500 mesh, a couple of the changes were to do with panels not dropping off because you touched the thing and previously the top and the front were fall to pieces, and that was fixed in the mesh and is much better. Now the top, you take a thumb screw out the back, you lift the top off. It's quite precise, but it comes off easy enough. The front panel, they've changed it again. With the mesh, there was a little catch in the back, in the front, I forget where. There was a catch. Oh, that's right, you had the slidey outy visory thing, didn't you? And then you had a catch. Anyway, there was a little catch and you simply clicked it and the front would come away. Dead easy, worked brilliantly. And with this, they've changed it. So with the main cable shroudy plate off the back, you need access. There are on each side a couple of clips. Let me see if I can find them, and you have to push them, oh God, in or out. All right, let's go around this side and do it on this side where I can actually see what the heck I'm doing. There's one, there's two, and then correspondingly we're going to have, there's three. All right, what's going on? Why isn't that coming? Are there 6 clips? Oh God, more clips. Right, 6 clips. Would you believe I only did this yesterday? I've already forgotten. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, bit fiddly, and with that cable management plate on the back here, you can't get to 3 of the clips. Therefore, you do need proper access. Now, that's not the end of the world. I mean, why do you want to get to your fans? Well, you might want to take this off to clear some dust out of the mesh. I mean, after all, it's going to have a filtering function. Every so often you'll need to remove it. That's annoying to me. You can, as a one-off, I mean, this would obviously be occasional maintenance, you can, once you've got this panel in your hand, remove this front mesh and add some glass. Now, aesthetically, I'm fine with that. Don't have a problem. And were you to put the glass in, you've still got the mesh there, flowing air to the front. However, I'm going to say don't do it. I'm going to say mesh front panel. If you've got a problem with the filtration, you're already knackered with the sides taking in air and dust together. So you might as well go for broke, whole front thing. So, okay, Cooler Master, not a bad idea. Just not interested personally. Mesh panel, that's what you want for airflow goodness. So we've got the chassis unveiled. The front panel has been revised, so they haven't revised it as far as to actually, give you an RGB button and a reset button. They've repurposed the button. They've got the Cooler Master logo-y button in that sort of standard style. We've got 4 USB 3.0s and 1 USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C plus headset jacks. Now the thing is, this motherboard only supports 1 USB 3.0 header. It also has the USB 3.1 Gen 2, but it does mean that I'm only able to connect up 2 of the 4 USB 3 ports on the front. Now in a sense, Cooler Master is in a bind. This is always the case. If they'd put, as with previous models, a USB 2 and USB 3 and USB 3.1, we'd be going, well, that's a bit oldie-worldy, isn't it? We might be going, that's a bit oldie-worldy. I probably wouldn't actually. However, if your motherboard does not have 2 USB 3.0 headers, and they're quite big things to put in a motherboard, then you're going to suffer. Unless you have some sort of dual-headed cable type arrangement internally, so you can either connect to 2 or 3, then, you know, what can you do? Backwards compatibility is always a problem, and in this instance the front panel is actually too advanced for this brand new X470 motherboard from Asus ROG. What can I say? It's a fact. However, in time, when the next motherboard has more headers, obviously you catch up and you're all good. Similarly with the ARGB, does your motherboard have RGB at all? If it does it have 1 header or 2 is a detail. Many motherboards have just the 1 header. If you've got RGB, do you have ARGB? Very few motherboards do. This is a bang up to date motherboard. It's got all the bells and whistles, and yet the ARGB appears to be incompatible with these fans at the moment. Cooler Master supplies an extension cable, so you can plug that into the little control panel around the back, and you can add more ARGB goodness. Okay, fair enough, that's all fine. As and when their software appears, we'll see how that works and whether it does the trick. I must confess I'd have probably preferred it if they'd come up, perhaps it's impossible, but some ARGB to RGB adapter or something, I'm not really quite sure. But anyway, as things stand, these fans work quite nicely with that control button, but obviously that is not the effect you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have the full wowzer. And, you know, hey-ho, haven't got that. Now, there's a couple of things about this case I do find annoying. So here we have a power supply cover, which when we saw this case at CES, they had a version of this with an RGB mid-plate, which looked really fruity. I'm trusting there'll be a version coming along at some point. I hate to think what model that's going to be, but RGB mid-plate, really like that. And then we have this cover here, which is not a power supply cover. It is a drive bay cover, and you release that and you uncover the 2 drive bays, and they are accessed from this side, which means if you want to put drives or SSDs in there, there are SSD mounts elsewhere. I mean, these rubber grommets, they have a clever peg system going on, which means you can simply mount SSDs on these little pegs they supply and plug them into the various grommets around the place, which is a very neat idea. But if you want to use a 3.5-inch hard drive, you have to remove that cover, take it out, pull out the caddy, put the drive in, put it back, connect the cables, which obviously from this side is quite easy to access, put the cover back in place. Also, the front of the power supply cover is sealed off, which again goes round to the back where the cable management, to my mind, it's not terrible. It's just tight for space in parts. I mean, I'm using a 600 watt fan as power supply, but it is a Seasonic Prime Titanium. It's a proper power supply, it's proper cables. And connecting up the cables it's a little bit of a fight because the space left is so small. And I am left with a number of thoughts. Okay, for one, you don't get an optical drive at the front. I personally don't care about this, but I know that readers and viewers of Kit Guru do mention this point every so often, so you don't get an optical drive. Okay, that's just a fact of life. The I/O on the front is super up to date. It's so up to date it's going to be a problem for some people. It's a problem in a sense for this motherboard, which is a real surprise to me. So it might be too advanced for you. If you can't connect up your I/O, that's not good. If on the other hand you're looking for super duper up to date Type-C and 4 USB 3, blooming brilliant. What's not to like? I'm not going to lose sleep over the fact that the RGB button is actually the reset button. That's okay. The fans I like. The fans work well as fans, they look good. This is a good thing. Having 2 more of those in the roof of the case and using that extension cable to hook those in the things, you had 4 200 RGB addressables, well, what's not to like there? That would be good. Now, where I don't like it quite so much is it's kind of the 1 point expanded. In the past, I have said about the MasterCase concept. When did Cooler Master first talk about that? 3 years ago now? I think it was 3 years. It might even be 4 years. I'm going to say 3 years. And they were saying they were going to come up with the good, better, best things. So you start with the basic version of a case and then you add features and it all gets absolutely lovely. But the problem is that the core chassis remains the same. And there comes a point to my mind when if you take, let's call it an £80 case, and you expand it with all the extra bells and whistles, at some point it's not a £200 case. You require a new core chassis, you have to come at it afresh. And I think that Cooler Master with the H500 is reaching that point. This is a penny under £200, 19999. The previous version was 150. So you're paying extra for all the glass, you're paying extra for the 200mm addressable RGB fans. That is not bad maths, but it's the way they've kind of bolted all the parts on. I'm not bothered about having extra glass. Having a glass main panel, good. If it was acrylic, that would be bad. Having a glass top panel, not really too troubled about that. Changing the front plastic for front glass, yeah, that works well enough, but the mesh I like. So mesh front, glass main, happy. Don't need glass top. Glass back, I don't get the glass back. The glass back, the question is, what can you see? And the general answer to that question is, or the usual answer is, a load of mess. You have to work hard to make the back of the case look good. So they've put in all those cover plates, those modesty panels, which means that through the glass you see various steel panels. What's the point? It really isn't, I mean, it's not offensive, it's just pointless. I don't want to see those modesty panels inside. And to get the modesty panels in place, you have to wrestle various cables through unnatural, places. And I don't get that. So most of the problems of this case, and they are relatively minor problems, come down to the fact that Cooler Master's gone for a second glass panel on this side, and that glass panel, therefore you have to cover up the interiors, you have to put the panels in place, therefore, and you end up with no space. And I also think that the modesty panel that supports and covers the RGB control panel and also covers the access from the power supply housing, that to me is just, it's a bit of a bodge job actually. The cover itself is far too large, you have to kind of in place, 2 screws to hold it. I'm not mad keen. Having an RGB controller somewhere on the back, yeah, absolutely fine. We've seen various fan controllers at various times, instead using an RGB controller somewhere on the back panel, yeah, no problem at all. But again, it's a modesty panel and it's not great. So in summary, the H500M is a good case in the same way that the 500 mesh was a good case. It's more expensive, but they're giving you a heck of a lot more for your money. However, 150 quid for the mesh was expensive. 200 for this is like, you have to seriously consider your decision. The I/O panel is either a problem or absolutely welcome to any point of view, or it's going to be more useful with your next motherboard upgrade if you think that far ahead. In terms of cooling and such like, it's the same as the mesh. The front mesh panel flows air. You can add a liquid cooler on the roof. You can add a custom loop without any great difficulty. The RGB is obviously the thing. The glass, to my mind, it's slightly excessive. Not badly done. Looks perfectly decent. The modesty panels I really do not like, and the cable management side of things I find aggravating. With the previous version, the 500 mesh, I was concentrating on the front panel. With this case, oddly enough, I'm concentrating on the, I'm calling it back, but this side panel, which really shouldn't be something I'm even giving a second thought to. That should be, here's your stuff inside, put the panel on, walk away. The fact it's also locked down with a plain screw is, relatively speaking, that is a detail. That glass panel is the single biggest issue for me. You might absolutely love that. It's perfectly possible, in which case the rest of it's great. However, I would have liked to have seen the finished version in this case where Cooler Master had some software to support their addressable RGB fans, as for whatever reason the Aura on this motherboard ain't doing that job. Shame that. Still, I'm counting this as a work in progress that's nearly finished, and I'm looking forward to seeing it when it is finished, because how they sign off that software and what it can do is going to be significant. Does it work beautifully? Does it conflict with other software? Does it absolutely wrap this up nicely, or does it leave an unanswered question or two? And before I finish up, you will have noted that I haven't mentioned the graphics support bracket, and the honest truth is it's because I don't care about it. I think it's a relatively ugly bit of kit. However, some people will use it for absolutely sure, and if you don't like it, you can remove it, which in a way kind of sums up my feelings about aspects of this case. I can see why they did it. I'm not mad keen on it, but it doesn't really change my decision about the case one way or the other. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe. Hit the bell button. You'll be alerted to new videos as they become available. I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This is the Cooler Master MasterCase H500M.